He once said, "Childhood's over the moment you realize you're going to die." You recognize this voice. You've seen this face before. The intensity sticks in your memory, but the name might escape you. This is Michael Wincott. During the late 1980s and early 1990s, he appeared repeatedly in films, not as the lead actor or the main attraction, but as a presence that added weight and gravity the instant he was on screen. And then, gradually, he vanished from the public eye. There was no scandal, no glaring moment when everything fell apart. That absence of a clear downfall is what makes his story particularly intriguing. Usually, when actors disappear from Hollywood, there's a shared narrative, a series of poor decisions, personal troubles, or a definitive turning point. With Wincott, none of that exists. So what truly happened? Let's fade to black and explore. Michael Wincott was born in Toronto in 1959. His mother was a dancer and an artist, while his father was a writer. It wasn't a household filled with celebrity glamour, but one where craft and dedication were deeply valued. There was an unspoken expectation that if you chose to pursue something, you did it with seriousness and discipline. Wincott didn't stumble into acting by chance. He chased it deliberately and intentionally. He trained at the prestigious Juilliard school and spent many years working in theater before stepping in front of a camera. This foundation is crucial because it shaped his approach, not learning how to market himself, but mastering control, voice, and stillness. Before Hollywood took notice, Wincott was already working steadily. His screen debut came in the Canadian horror film Curtains, a strange and unsettling movie that relied heavily on atmosphere rather than clear explanations. Around the same time, he appeared on television, including a brief stint on Miami Vice in the early 1980s. These roles didn't catapult him to fame, but they gave him visibility and, more importantly, revealed the type of presence he would bring to the screen. By the time Hollywood started to notice, Wincott was fully aware of his strengths. The question wasn't whether he could perform. It was whether the industry knew how to utilize an actor like him. By the late 1980s, Wincott was steadily moving through the ranks. He appeared in films such as The Sicilian, Talk Radio, and Born on the 4th of July. His roles were often brief or on the periphery of the main story, but he was consistently cast to lend weight, menace, or authority to a scene. These weren't necessarily star-making parts, but they positioned him as a dependable actor directors trusted to bring gravitas. When the 1990s arrived, Hollywood already understood what Wincott brought to a film, and his roles began to grow in size and significance. In the 1991 film, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, Wincott portrayed Guy of Gisborne, opposite Alan Rickman, who played the Sheriff of Nottingham with flamboyance and flair. Wincott's approach was entirely different. He pulled everything inward, embodying cruelty without any camp or irony. His portrayal felt raw, grounded, and unsettling. Then came The Crow, a gothic, violent, and operatic film, where Wincott again refrained from dominating the frame visually. Instead, he allowed his voice and stillness to define his character. Even in uneven films like Strange Days and Alien Resurrection, his style remained consistent. He never winked at the audience or softened the edges of his characters to make them more palatable. This pattern defined Wincott's career. He didn't command scenes through loudness or showmanship, but through a magnetic gravity. When he appeared on screen, viewers couldn't help but watch him, even when he barely moved. For a time, Hollywood valued this unique presence. He became the go-to actor whenever a film needed someone who was unsettling, dangerous, or morally ambiguous. His work wasn't limited to genre films either. Throughout the early 1990s, he appeared in mainstream projects like 1492, Conquest of Paradise, The Three Musketeers, Metro, and Romeo is Bleeding. His roles varied in size, but were consistent in tone and style. Romeo is Bleeding is particularly notable because Wincott shared the screen with Gary Oldman, another actor known for intense performances. Oldman's characters often evolve, shifting through different moral shades, but Wincott's characters typically remain fixed and unresolved. They hold their form and don't open themselves up to the audience. This consistency is compelling, but also subtly highlights the limitations in how he was cast. People who worked with Wincott often described him as an actor who required little management. Once he understood a role, he was prepared, efficient, and clear about his intentions. He worked steadily and delivered reliably. However, this kind of precision and economy didn't always lead to bigger roles or upward mobility in Hollywood. Sometimes it simply cemented an actor in a niche. Hollywood and audiences usually prefer clarity, characters who express their emotions openly, signal their motivations, and guide viewers through the narrative. Wincott's characters defied that expectation. He contained their emotions rather than explaining them, allowing ambiguity to linger. As films became louder, faster, and more explicit about what they wanted audiences to feel, his guarded approach became harder to place. By the early 2000s, Wincott's film appearances began to thin out, not abruptly or dramatically, but gradually. This shift was less about faulting Hollywood or Wincott himself, and more about changing audience expectations. Viewers were conditioned to prefer characters who were easier to read, more emotionally transparent, and less mysterious. Studios responded by favoring actors who could act as versatile tools, adaptable, reassuring, and able to shift smoothly between tones. Wincott, however, was not that kind of actor. He was more like a scalpel or a hammer, precise and deliberate rather than multi-purpose. In fact, one could argue that Wincott might have been more at home in American cinema a generation earlier. The 1970s allowed actors like Gene Hackman, Al Pacino, and Robert De Niro to play opaque, enigmatic characters who didn't always explain themselves. That guardedness wasn't a liability. It was part of their appeal. But by the time Wincott came along, the industry was already moving away from that style. Not necessarily wrong, but out of step with his approach. So rather than fight the tide, Wincott stepped sideways. His departure wasn't born of desperation or lack of work, but because he had an alternative. Theater had always been his foundation, a place where his voice, stillness, and precision were assets rather than liabilities. He returned to the stage not as an escape, but as a priority. Unlike some actors who return to theater as a prestige move or a way to regain fame, Wincott's return was quiet and unpublicized. He frequently appeared in New York or regional productions without fanfare, choosing projects for the craft rather than for visibility or status. Although he stepped back from the central Hollywood spotlight, he never fully abandoned the screen. He became more selective, choosing smaller or more personal roles rather than those designed to keep him in the public eye. Hollywood often demands a trade-off, visibility in exchange for compromise. Wincott quietly declined this trade and kept working on his own terms. This wasn't a retreat, but a form of authorship, making choices aligned with his own values rather than industry pressures. Even into the 2000s, Wincott appeared in mainstream films such as Along Came a Spider, but his roles became narrower and more familiar. Some of his later projects seemed more personal. For example, The Diving Bell and the Butterfly, a film he joined because of his connection to the people involved, rather than career strategy. He also appeared in What Just Happened, a movie about the chaos and absurdity of Hollywood itself, a choice that felt quietly fitting, given his own career trajectory. Wincott also expanded into voice work during this period, a natural fit given the commanding quality of his voice. His vocal performances conveyed authority, weariness, and threat without the need for visual context. It was the same magnetic presence he brought to the screen, now reaching audiences without the camera's gaze. This continued diversification showed his adaptability and commitment to craft beyond conventional acting roles. In 2022, an interesting development occurred when director Jordan Peele cast Michael Wincott in the film Nope. Wincott played Antlis Holst, a veteran cinematographer obsessed with capturing the impossible shot. It was a small but precise role that didn't require Wincott to reinvent himself. He didn't soften or update his style to fit modern trends. Instead, Peele wrote a character that demanded exactly what Wincott has always brought to his performances: seriousness, restraint, and intensity without explanation. For a moment, the industry met him on his own terms. Outside of his professional life, Wincott remains intensely private. There's no publicly confirmed information about his marital status or whether he has children, and he doesn't maintain a clear public home base. In many ways, his private life mirrors his screen persona: guarded, reserved, and deliberately opaque. So what really happened to Michael Wincott? In essence, nothing happened to him. What stayed consistent was his approach to acting. He never chased loudness, visibility, or trend chasing. Instead, he built a career grounded in his own values and vision of what acting should be, even when that meant stepping away from the spotlight. Wincott once said, "My worst work is when I'm obedient," and that statement feels like the key to understanding his entire career. It explains why he never compromised for the sake of fame or commercial success. For anyone entering the craft today, there's much to learn from his ethic and commitment. Ultimately, Michael Wincott has built a body of work that any actor could be proud of. He didn't fade away. Rather, the kinds of films that required his unique presence became rarer. And if you appreciate this type of actor, you can still feel his impact today. If you enjoy this content, a like, comment, or subscription truly helps the channel. As always, I look forward to seeing you all in the next video.